in every church that I have served as the pastor since I was ordained, the worship committee has pondered the dilemma of how best to invite people to get ready for true worship in the sanctuary on Sunday mornings. We've talked about how do you invite the congregation? How do you get people to show up on time? How do you get us to open our hearts and minds to God? The history of faith suggests that worship is always most successful when our hearts are open and ready, and least successful when we're hurried and rushed and our hearts are closed and we're tense and tight for whatever reason. At the beginning of the service, you can see in the bulletin a word prelude. And over the history of faith, there's always been an instrumental prelude. In ancient times, it was played on stringed instruments and with drums. In nowadays church, it's played by a praise band or by an organ or a piano in many different ways. And that music time is presented as a way in which we are to stop talking and let go of all of the concerns that we have and be ready for God to speak to us. But it's hard to do because we get here late, and sometimes we're here by the middle of the first hymn, and sometimes after that. And where does our preparation for worship disappear to? Prelude means getting ready for something. Prelude means being prepared, which is a Scout motto. Prelude means I'm focused on what's coming. I know what's there, and I'll do my best to take advantage of it the very best way I can. If you've been following the news in Egypt over the past week, you've seen the stunning evidence of history changing in front of our very eyes. The past few weeks in Egypt might have been called a prelude to a revolution or a prelude to a storm. If Hosni Mubarak, the Egyptian president, and his administration and government had been more aware, they could have seen where things were going. They could have seen what was coming. But if you don't want to get ready, if you don't want to be prepared, there's nothing that anyone can do. As late as Thursday night of this past week, Hosni Mubarak went on television in Egypt, and everyone expected him to step down, and instead he defiantly said that he was staying in office until next September. He didn't hear the will of the people. He wasn't prepared for what was coming. And overnight, the military stepped in and forced him from office. He wasn't ready within his heart to be reconciled to the will of the people. This week, governors across our country are struggling with how to balance budgets that are in huge deficits. And you all know that California is one of those states. And governors, as they approach their State of the State address, are wondering, how do I get us ready for the hard decisions that are coming? How do I encourage the constituents of this state to enter a time of prelude, of preparation for what we're going to have to decide to do, either to cut or to find new revenue or both? How do we advance and face the severe issues that are in front of us? I was listening to a radio show this past week called Marketplace that is hosted by Kai Ryssdal on National Public Radio. And Kai Ryssdal was talking to a man by the name of Stephen Dubner, who was addressing the issue of what states are going through right now. And Kai Ryssdal said to Dubner, we on the broadcast talk shows address the issue of pain a lot, and specifically financial pain. The president wants to cut the budget. Congress is having conversations about this. States are out of money. Households don't have enough money these days. Make that connection for me. And Stephen Dubner says, I went to Governor Martin O'Malley of the state of Maryland, which is like a lot of states, in a huge debt. They're $1.4 billion in the hole, or 10%. He's got to sell his constituents on the pain of those cutbacks. And I asked him, how do you plan to sell this pain? And Governor O'Malley replied with a certain amount of honesty and said, I've been well advised by my closest advisors not to use the word pain, not to use the word painful. Those words cause pain, and those words are painful. And when he addressed the citizens of Maryland a few days later, lo and behold, you couldn't hear the word pain anywhere in his speech. He talked about tough choices and difficult times. But it's true that so many of us in the states in which we live are not ready for the hard decisions that are coming. We're not focused on what's ahead of us, the difficult choices. I was in a conversation with one of the members of our reconciling committee here in the church. The reconciling committee is exploring ways to make our church more welcoming to all people regardless of sexual orientation. And this member said to me, well, what are you going to do about Boy Scout Sunday, this coming Sunday? And I says, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, you know that the Boy Scouts of America is a national organization, not Troop 27, but the national organization refuses to allow anyone who is an openly gay young man to be a member of a Boy Scout troop. Are you going to say something about that? And I says, well, don't you think it's a little rude to say something about that on Boy Scout Sunday? And she said, so you're going to let us just slide over the pain of what we're wrestling with here in church just because we've got guests and visitors? And I thought to myself, with no offense to these young men, how do you talk about getting ready for the hardest decisions in life, about how we treat each other, about how we are in relation to our sisters and brothers around the world, about how we are connected or not connected to one another right here in church? If pain is a word that many Americans don't want to hear, whether it be in regard to cutting budgets or dealing with issues of acceptance and openness, the parallel discomfort for us here in church is that we don't want to be disturbed by tough questions either. We'd rather come on Sunday morning and be uplifted and let our hearts be full and happy and joyous and go home and not have to be asked tough questions. But then comes this disturbing passage that Anthony read from the Gospel of Matthew, when Jesus said, "You're familiar with the command of the ancients, do not murder. I'm telling you that anyone who is so much as angry with a brother or a sister is guilty of murder. Carelessly call a brother idiot, and you might just find yourself hauled into heavenly court. Thoughtlessly yell stupid at a sister, and you are on the brink of hellfire." The simple moral fact is that words can kill. This is how I want you to conduct yourself in these matters, Jesus went on to say. If you enter your place of worship and are about to make an offering, and suddenly remember that a friend or an enemy has a grudge against you, then go and find that person and be reconciled to him or to her, and then come back and start to worship all over again. Or say you're out on the street and an old enemy accosts you. Don't lose a minute. Make the first move. Make things right with him or her. After all, if you leave the first move to them, to your enemies, knowing their track record, why, you're likely to end up in court again, maybe even jail, because neither one of you made the first move. What is so startling about these words that Jesus tells all of us, these words from the Sermon on the Mount, is that he takes commandment number 6 in the 10 Commandments. Number 6 says, "Thou shalt not kill." He takes that and expands it to refer to every single relationship that you and I have in our lives and the quality of that, and suggests that whenever we abuse or mistreat or harm anyone, it is the same as murder. And we say, wait a minute now. You know, I can get upset, someone can be upset with me, but I haven't killed them. I haven't done any great harm to them. But Jesus says, when you come into worship, into the time of prelude, of getting ready, and are about to worship God, if you come in and have called a politician from the other side of the aisle a reprehensible name, if you have cussed out someone at work, if you have yelled at a member of your family with abusive language, if you have called a member of your Boy Scout troop a fag, it is as if we had murdered them, as if we had killed them. Jesus shows us that anger and murder are on the same continuum, and it is such a little jump from one to the other. They can become so very close that in the eyes of God, whether or not that person's heart is still beating, we may have killed them in God's eyes. We may have shut them out and done away with them. And Jesus says to all of us, go and be reconciled. And that's maybe the most difficult thing anyone can say to us when we're in the midst of anger, let alone the words that we want to hear when we sit down to worship together in church. Go and be reconciled. Be at peace with brothers and sisters. Figure out where your most fragile relationship is and fix it. Don't let another day go by with you being unable to speak to a brother or a sister who lives on the other side of the country and you haven't spoken to each other in 25 years. Figure out where those toughest of places are and do something about it. There are a lot of us who've memorized the 23rd Psalm, and there's a verse in the 23rd Psalm that says, "Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies." Writer Patricia DeJong, who's a Christian writer, says, "This is the description of hospitality of the desert people of the time that Jesus lived in. If I were being pursued by an enemy and came to your camp, you would have to welcome me and you would have to keep me for 2 nights and a day. And the enemy would have to wait for me outside the circle cast by the firelight of your fire." Imagine that. An enemy would have to be patiently waiting out there and couldn't come into the circle of firelight. And as the enemy waited 2 nights and a day outside that circle, there would be a time of reflection and perhaps even a time to change one's heart. And maybe that enemy could think about it and take a deep breath and let go of all that's pent up inside. That is a transformation. When I was in high school, I read the novel Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, this masterpiece of 20th century literature that was published in 1946 and foresees a future society for all the world. And it's amazing that with each year that goes by, Huxley's novel seems to be more pertinent rather than less, as it talks about the challenges that we face with the dehumanization of society and of one another, and of how we want easy and quick solutions. In the novel, the writer talks about a drug in the future called Soma, S-O-M-A, and it's a pill. And if you're really angry, you just shake the bottle open and take one of these pills, and it just soothes you right out and calms you down, and your problems all go away. Well, the problem is that reconciliation can't be solved that easily. Being reconciled to one another takes hard work on all of our parts, every single one of us. There is no way around it. It's hard to go to somebody from whom you are estranged and reach out in Christian sisterhood and brotherhood.